Back again for the second time this week. We've got Larry Klayman, who is ready to drain this incredibly full swamp, Larry. It's like full swampiness right now.
It's like shooting goldfish in a bowl. Alligators.
It's like finding alligators in a swamp. You know, Larry, I did a movie in Louisiana in 2009, and they told me the most dangerous thing in the swamp is actually, well, the spiders, because you can't see them. But I think in Washington, D.C., the most dangerous thing in the swamp are the creatures that are right before our very eyes. You know, since you and I last spoke, I've really been looking into our friend, Mr. Barr, who should be disbarred, to tell you the truth. But it turns out that while he was the Attorney General under George H.W. Bush, Robert Mueller was the Assistant Attorney General, which I had confused with the Deputy Attorney General. But what exactly is the difference between the Assistant Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, and what should we expect the relationship between the Attorney General Barr and the Assistant Attorney General Mueller would be?
The Deputy Attorney General is right under the Attorney General of the Justice Department, and he is like the CEO, COO, Chief Operating Officers. He'll put into effect the edicts of the Attorney General, which in theory come from the President. You know, there's this misnomer that the Justice Department is supposed to be independent. No, it's an executive branch agency. The Attorney General does serve at the pleasure of the President. The President is on top of the Justice Department, and the Attorney General works under him, and then you have the Deputy Attorney General. Now, the Assistant Attorney General, what William Barr was, is the head of the criminal division of the Justice Department.
Mueller was, while Barr was the AG.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I got it reversed. You're right. So anyway, they have a close relationship, close working relationship. So that's obviously a problem.
It's really shocking to think. I mean, I know you got to be pretty busy doing the job of President of the United States. And I know you and I have been asking this question each time we speak for basically the last year. But what the hell is Trump doing? How could I, just a putz sitting here in my apartment with Google, how could I find this out about William Barr and Donald Trump not know? It doesn't seem possible.
He has a false sense of security. Now, I suspect that Rudy Giuliani, his private lawyer, and Jay Sekulow, who know William Barr, strongly recommended William Barr. I know people out there right now who are my friends that won't criticize William Barr because they're friends with him.
Wow.
And because they have clients that need his help, obviously, as Attorney General when he gets put into office. I've never been that way, Jason. I can't do it. I don't want to be a lawyer if that's the way I'm going to be. I'm not going to couch things when things are not right. But William Barr is this establishment creature. He's no different than a lot of other people in Washington, D.C. He may not be the worst guy in the world in a personal sense, but he just sold out as president this week with his testimony. President who put his faith in him, who nominated him. This, bullshit, for lack of a better word, that he's 68 years old and is doing this as a favor to the country. It's total bullshit.
Yeah.
68 is not old. And obviously people in Washington, D.C. love power, and with power comes money. It helps enrich him when he leaves for his retirement. So, I'm just sick and tired of the hypocrisy and lies that come out of these swamp creatures. And William Barr, whether or not I have clients that will need anything from him, I frankly, after Jeff Sessions, I'm not counting on the Attorney General of the United States to do anything. I'll do it for my clients and I'll do it for myself. I'm not going to ask people for any favors anymore. I trust that the justice system at some point might be slightly responsive to the needs of the American people.
Well, we can only hope. And, Larry, all these different branches of the DOJ, or I should say the different individuals involved in the DOJ, seem to be working against the American people. I want to encourage people to go and visit Freedom Watch freedomusa.org, because Larry and his team of attorneys at Freedom Watch are doing the work that the Department of Justice should be doing. They're challenging Robert Mueller's authority. They're defending innocent people who Robert Mueller is basically executing lawfare against. I'm talking, of course, about Sheriff Joe Arpaio, the Bundys, Dr. Corsi. It's really important that people who are justice-minded, even if you disagree with the political opinions of some of these clients, you have to agree that we cannot have an FBI and a DOJ that just goes after people and uses these strong-arm thug tactics in the way that they've been doing, Larry. The work that you guys over there at freedomwatchusa.org are doing is so important to everyone.
Jason, you can see what's at issue here, and this is what gets under my skin, and I've been that way since I've been a young lawyer. I mean, frankly, I don't like authority when authority is coming from people who are less intelligent than you are and don't have good intentions, okay?
Right.
I disdain authority. I've been that way since I was in kindergarten, as a matter of fact. But when you see it at the top branches of government, just hearken back to earlier in this week. Look at the hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Look at the senators, look at the people who came forward to testify on behalf of William Barr, the same cast of characters, Jonathan Turley, others, in the Washington legal community. They're all one happy family. It's all one giant club. And they're happy to promote their own. And I assure you that there are many Democrats as well who are favorably disposed to William Barr because he just caved in. And they know that he's going to let Mueller do whatever he wants, Bob, as he's called by everybody, and that the president is going to suffer by it. And as a result, there's a very good chance, unless we fight back, and we're trying to do this at Freedom Watch on behalf of our supporters, fellow patriots, and the American people, that this president could be removed from office if we just sit back and do nothing. Because both establishments and both political parties, they're part of this giant swamp club, and Trump breaks up that club. He breaks up their money train, their power train. He is a threat to them. He's been a threat from the day he announced for the presidency of the United States. And the American people in our vote mean little to nothing to them because, see, they think that they're smarter than we are. They think that they're the new American nobility. They think that they're better than we are, but they're not. In fact, they're the exact reason we fought the revolution in 1776. That was the attitude of the British Crown. And we see it now. It's even worse, Jason, because these deep state swamp creatures of both political parties have tremendous power. They have surveillance powers of the intelligence agencies. They own the judges. The judges, by and large, are yes men, just as they were in the court of King James or King George III. There are vigilante groups out there, leftist groups, comprised of radical atheists, radical feminists, radical Muslims, radical pro-lesbian, gay rights, and transgender groups. All kinds of efforts out there to destabilize this country, either through violence or otherwise. Then you have the leftist media, the Washington Post, the Washington Times, the Huffington Post, BuzzFeed, that's just been debunked about the report that Michael Cohen said the president asked him to lie about building a Trump Tower in Moscow before Congress. And, of course, the social media companies. We are up against not just a tyrannical government, but a left that is trying to collude with that tyrannical government to seize control of this country from the vision of our founding fathers and what this country stood for in 1776 and for many years thereafter. And that's why, Jason, I wrote an article today for WorldNet Daily. It's going to be up at worldnetdaily.com. It probably already is. I'm putting it up at freedomwatchusa.org. I'm going to blast it out. I believe in a peaceful and legal revolution, but I also believe in the Second Amendment. And I believe that the American people, in light of all that's going on, need to be well armed only in self-defense, not to use it offensively, but to use it when all hell breaks loose. And all hell is about ready to break loose with what we're seeing these days. I guarantee it. I don't want to see it. I'm trying to avoid it, but it's going to happen. And that's why we have the Second Amendment, and the word gun and militia is not a dirty word. as long as you act peacefully and legally and only in self-defense.
Right. And Larry, you know, we got a lot of things to talk about. The BuzzFeed article. It's amazing to me that BuzzFeed is still paid attention to as something that's anything other than total falsehoods. But there's this matter of the changing memos from Barr. He had this memo about, you know, it seemed like he was in favor of Donald Trump with the Mueller probe memo that they were worried was going to disqualify him. I'm feeling quite a bit like this entire confirmation hearing is a big charade to just sort of, I don't know, make it seem like this guy is pro-Trump and that they're going to fight bringing him in, and that when he gets in, they feel like, oh, they did this to help Trump, and then he's going to pounce and work with Mueller to destroy Trump.
Well, that's it. I mean, the president's been told, gee, it's great to have somebody in there that knows, quote, Bobby Mueller. Okay? So you've got big Bill Barr and Bob Mueller, two Billy Bobs, in effect, you know, joined at the hip, like Siamese twins. But, you know, it doesn't work that way in Washington. Not at all. Because the same people that convinced the president to nominate William Barr are the same people that want to take the president down and stab him in the back. And then you've got a lawyer like Rudy Giuliani, and I hate to be so negative, Jason, but this is the way I feel. I feel it in my heart. I'm angry. I'm thinking about it every minute of every day, what we can do peacefully and legally to save the country. But Rudy Giuliani is not fit for prime time. He's a joke. He goes on TV half the time. He's drunk. You know, just this week, you know, he said he didn't know who else in the campaign had colluded with Russia. What kind of a moron would say something like that when you're so-called a defender of the president?
Yeah.
So couple that with Billy Bob, okay, Rudy Giuliani, Jay Sekulow, who's a fine religious rights lawyer, is out of his league. The president is left defenseless with bad advice as he's trying to, you know, run the country and build a wall, save us from illegal immigrants coming across that are part of the Cali drug cartel and terrorists, as he's dealing with North Korea, Iran, and a host of other issues. And yet he thinks that because his attorney general is friends with Bob Mueller, that that's going to get him off the hook. Forget it, because in the minds of the establishment in Washington, D.C., he is not just an outsider, but he's a cancer to them, because he's destroying their power. He's destroying their money train. Go to Washington, D.C. these days, Jason. See the wealth. See the buildings that are going up in Southwest. See the expansion of government, notwithstanding the temporary shutdown. And you'll see that it's an industry in and of itself. And Trump threatens that industry, and therefore he has to be destroyed. And in the process, the country's going to be destroyed.
Right. You know, I mean, Larry, we've heard so many times about the Washington, D.C. club. I mean, I wonder if you're possibly even being too generous, too kind, because club, okay, we get it. That's one thing, friends helping each other. I feel like this is far more sinister. I feel like Mr. Barr being so closely aligned to H.W. Bush, his ties to the CIA. Since we last spoke, I've learned that Barr's father was in the OSS, and Barr entered the CIA at a very young age as an intern and actually went to law school while he was at the CIA. Self-admitted during the confirmation hearing he was the outside counsel to the CIA. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't that mean that he's just a hired lawyer who works for the CIA?
It does, Jason, and you know, it's really regrettable, but you know, I look back at the Bush funeral. Nobody wants to see the death of the president, regardless of his political views or what he's done. But that was another sickening scene to see the Washington beautiful people sitting around there, you know, coalescing and celebrating, including the Obamas, the Clintons, and the rest of them. It's one happy family there. And William Barr is a tool. That's what he is. All he is a tool. He's a tool of the power brokers in Washington, D.C. Frankly, he didn't do anything when he was Attorney General the first time. So all these accolades about him, even Laura Ingraham on Fox News, you know, who knew him. And
crazy that Laura Ingraham
Carlson
came out in favor of him.
Well, she's a quote friend, okay, and then you've got Sean Hannity, who effectively endorsed him this week.
Terrible.
And when he got deluged with emails and text messages saying, "Why are you doing that?" When the guy says there's no witch hunt, I'm going to rubber stamp everything Mueller wants. Then he says, finally, last night I have some concerns about William Barr. I'm sick and tired of this kind of stuff. Is that somebody's got to tell it straight. It's why I appreciate you. You tell it straight. You allow me to tell it straight. And we are in a crisis right now. We are in a civil war, if not revolution, with the left. And frankly, at this point, we're losing. But it's only the first quarter. We got 3 more quarters to go. And we will prevail. I believe that God is on our side. But also, we need to do it for ourselves. And we need to rise up and not take it anymore. I'm sick and tired of this garbage.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you know, frankly, him endorsing Robert Mueller is obviously disconcerting, but it's kind of on the low end of things that he's done that really trouble me. I was very young when IranContra was going on, and, you know, there are details about it that perhaps I don't remember very well or never really knew exactly what was going on. I mean, we're aware that IranContra was an illicit plan put together seemingly by H.W. Bush through the CIA to sell tow missiles and guns to the Ayatollah Khomeini for his war against Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and then to use that money to purchase cocaine from the Contras who were fighting the communist Sandinistas in Nicaragua. And they bought cocaine from these guys and flew it back to Mena, Arkansas, where Bill Clinton was the governor, and Barry Seal and Chip Tatum, and all these guys have spoken about it. William Barr was involved in the pardons of many of the people who never faced justice for IranContra, one of the worst crimes ever perpetrated by members of the U.S. government. What do we know about this involvement? I mean, you say he did nothing. I think he did worse than nothing. I think he helped criminals while he was Attorney General. No one's talking about this.
You know, it's something that we'll look into at Freedom Watch. IranContra, I mean, let me say this. The goal of President Reagan, I believe, was noble. It was to support the Contras in Nicaragua. But the wrong means were used, and it got out of control. We did business with the Ayatollah. We armed the Ayatollah during that period. We also gave anthrax and chemical weapons to Saddam Hussein in Iraq. This was Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld. I mean, these people are essentially war criminals. They really are. And they made it even worse later with what they did, getting us into Iraq, at least Cheney and Rumsfeld. I mean, all these American soldiers who have gone over there and died for little to nothing. You know, I don't believe that one American life is worth what went on over there. And this is something which is very, very serious. So, you know, you see the president who was against this as well, President Trump. We know that the CIA in all likelihood killed John F. Kennedy. They didn't like the way he acted with regard to the Bay of Pigs, and they thought he was a communist sympathizer. And I fear for this president, because he's up against the powerful forces, not just of the political elite, but of these intel agencies and the CIA, who, you know, frankly, want to perpetuate this war machine, which accomplishes little to nothing. Now, the president gave a speech this week about our defenses. Because we've been spending all this money on these inappropriate, worthless wars, which are to prop up Arabs primarily in the Middle East, Arabs who will never, ever even get along with themselves, who would just as soon kill themselves as a second measure to Jews and Christians. The president rightly said, well, you know, we haven't been spending money on nuclear defenses, on missiles and other technology because we've been drained in these wars. And this is something which, you know, is unforgivable. So, and the Bush family, you know, regardless of the veneer that's put on it, and with the exception of Jeb Bush, who I think is a decent human being, but his dad...
Larry, are you okay? You having a fever? Jeb Bush?
Well, Jeb's a nothing, okay? I mean, he's a placebo, you know, in terms of governor of Florida. But his dad, and, you know, I think was frankly evil, and I believe that, you know, W was so stupid he didn't know what was going on.
Let me address some of the things that you've raised, because I think they're very important. And to me, Iran-Contra is something that the American people, we've never really seen this fully fleshed out. And I know that you are a big supporter of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan's presidency, of course, is the first that I remember as a kid. And life in America was kind of fantastic when Ronald Reagan was the president. We had Rambo movies in the theaters. We had lots of prosperity here in the United States. And as an adult, I've come to the conclusion, my opinion, of course, that I think Ronald Reagan was essentially manipulated by George Bush and Dick Cheney and all of the neocons that we've seen, fill the executive branch after Reagan. I feel like Ronald Reagan was put in that position because he was an actor, and they tried to do the same thing to him that they did to Kennedy. Kennedy famously was coerced into using Lyndon Johnson as his running mate, and Johnson planned to kill Kennedy from the first day, I believe. And
I think you're right about that. Let me give you a little story here.
Yeah.
Around that time period when Reagan was shot, shortly after he was shot, I was in court on a matter, and I picked up some boxes, and I severely herniated 2 discs in my back.
Ooh.
I barely could move. And I went to a doctor at George Washington University. I forget his first name, is Dr. Cabrini. He is the neurosurgeon who saved the press secretary to Reagan.
Brady? Was that Brady?
Yeah, Brady, James Brady. And he said, Larry, I'm a supporter of you at Judicial Watch. I want to tell you a story. I said, what's that? He said, when I was treating Reagan and I was treating Brady, George H.W. Bush would come over to the hospital to brief the president. And he said, I could not believe what I was hearing, because behind his back, H.W. Bush was denigrating and disparaging President Reagan, calling him stupid, and I was really offended at the whole thing. Contrary to the veneer that's put on H.W. Bush and W. Bush and others in that family, they're low-class people. They really are low-class people. So I believe that H.W. Bush was manipulating Reagan and behind his back, stabbing him in the back.
Yes. And I think that this is at the time, I think they'd be hard-pressed to pull something like this again. But I think this was their method. Basically, nobody votes for president based on who the vice president is, and no one really knew who George Bush was on a national scale when he ran as the vice president with Ronald Reagan, and I'm not surprised to hear that story. People probably...
Listen to this, Jason. Yeah. Let me add this. When W was elected president, he kept George Tenet, Clinton's CIA director, in at the CIA as his director. Why would you do that? Why would you want someone loyal to Bill Clinton? I believe because Tenet, the quid pro quo, was to cover up all the stuff that his dad had done when his dad was director of the CIA, to keep the skeletons buried because of the stuff he did.
Yeah.
And I said that long before you gave me your opinion on the whole matter.
Sure. And people also know, of course, that H.W. was good friends with the Hinckley family, John Hinckley Jr. being the alleged trigger man on the Reagan assassination attempt. But I'm sure their plans were to kill Ronald Reagan and for H.W. Bush to take over as president. Not at all surprised to hear him disparaging Reagan. I think it's clear that he had no regard for Ronald Reagan whatsoever. And I think it's clear from Ronald Reagan's history as the president of the Screen Actors Guild and the governor of California, he was very, very anti-communist. As a matter of fact, a lot of that McCarthy-era communism, that witch hunting had a big impact on Hollywood. There are a lot of liberals in Hollywood who were communists, and Reagan was very, very against that. So I think he was against the communist Sandinistas, but I don't think he knew what they were doing with Iran-Contra, and I think they kept it that way, just like they're whispering behind his back.
I believe that, but I do think that Reagan had a noble goal.
I think Reagan was a nice man. He wanted
to get rid of them. And let me tell you, Reagan, I think, was a lot smarter than H.W. Bush. He had great instincts. H.W. Bush thought he was smarter. The Bush family thinks they're smarter than everybody else. And, I remember in 2000, and I participated in the election fight, Gore v. Bush in Tallahassee, and was involved in that.
Right.
I wasn't trying to, as head of Judicial Watch, support any particular candidate. I just wanted to make sure that the person who the American people voted for actually won. In my heart, I wanted W to win because nothing could be worse than Al Gore after Clinton. It was lesser of evils. But I had little respect for W. I thought he was an idiot, frankly, and I still think that.
I think you're right.
But but I remember at that time, the whole dynamic. And, I was saying as head of Judicial Watch to the new Bush administration, W. Bush, to his Attorney General, Ashcroft, let's settle all the lawsuits that I have on behalf of the people whose FBI files were taken, who were the women that were trashed by Hillary Clinton that I wrote lawsuits for, Travelgate. I had a whole bunch of cases that the Justice Department was defending. And the Bush administration turned a blind eye to that. And it was no sooner than W was elected as confirmed by the Supreme Court with a phony decision, which they said never cite as precedent again, that they invited the Clintons to the White House. And Barbara Bush and George W. Bush sat down with the Clintons, and the Clintons became really chummy with the Bush family, and they became chummy with the dad later after that. And it was just one giant presidential club. And, I do believe, let me just say this, I think Jeb never did anything that was bad. He was a good governor of Florida. I had my differences with him too. He didn't stand up for Terry Schiavo, the woman who was killed in that hospice many years ago. But the rest of this family is just low class. It's low class, and they're not what they appear to be. And the dad and W did a lot of harm to this country.
Larry, we've been really digging into this William Barr thing because I'm just finding it so disturbing, and we're finding so many things. Like, I don't know if you've seen this photograph of Bubba with Poppy H.W., and George Wallace here, but this certainly looks like a pretty young Bill Clinton, maybe in his 20s.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, isn't it?
Have you seen that before?
I've never seen it, but they all suck up to who they have to suck up to. It's like I said, Jason, it's one giant club, left, right, center, whatever. It's one giant club. We're part of the American nobility. We rule the school. We decide what's good for the rest of the people. The people be damned, and this is the attitude of these people.
And you raised a couple of other interesting points that I just wanted to address really briefly, because you were talking about how Iran-Contra involved the United States providing anthrax to Saddam Hussein. And that's actually something I'm really intrigued when I have different guests on Crowdsource the Truth who maybe don't know each other and haven't spoken to each other, but they say things that connect. So,
well, it was that strain of anthrax, Jason. It is believed was the same anthrax that was used after 9/11 that was trained on the postal workers and others in Washington, D.C., as well as American media down in South Florida. I myself, at the time, was running Judicial Watch. We got our mail from the Brentwood post office. I had to have our entire staff go get Cipro because we were getting mail, and that was contaminated. That was the anthrax that was given to Saddam Hussein that somehow wound up back used against us years later. And the chemical weapons, that's likely where the Syrians got it and others got it. And these people just had little regard for human life. And, years later, W had little regard for human life with what he did in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Right. And with regard to the viral strain, it wasn't just that. It was a weaponized form of anthrax that was put into this spore powder that was more easily airborne, so that when you breathe it in, it becomes super, super deadly. So it's not a coincidence that Saddam Hussein would have that and the U.S. government would have that, because it is a biological weapon. Now, Cody Snodgrass is a former special ops contractor to the various secret agencies and everything like that. And what he said was that the Murrah building in Oklahoma City housed a lot of medical records for veterans who were returning from the first Gulf War, who had been exposed not only to depleted uranium, but an experimental anthrax vaccine had been created specifically for the U.S. servicemen and women. And their Gulf War syndrome is in part attributed to this anthrax vaccine that was given to them out of fear that Saddam Hussein might use the anthrax that was given to him, very likely by the same people that we're talking about. And according to Cody, the destruction of the Murrah building was a CIA operation to destroy the records and do away with all of the legal liability, because what happened was this illness was passed from the servicemen and women to their spouses and to their offspring because it got into their DNA and the semen of the men and everything. So this was a really huge disaster. And the thing that I'm getting at is what Donald Trump represents is a break from this Bush-Clinton-dominated past, and that's what these guys are so afraid of. Donald Trump surrounding himself with the likes of John Bolton and William Barr really frightens me.
Yeah, depending on who he surrounds himself with, but I do believe that the president has good instincts, and I do trust the president. I just wish he was allowed to do his job, and of course we at Freedom Watch are doing our best to try to ensure that he can finish his presidency and represent the American people. So I hope people will go to freedomwatchusa.org, donate to our cause. Go to KlaymanBundyDefenseFund.org. There are developments on that this week. The Justice Department is now so-called Justice Department, Department of Injustice, wants yet another extension to decide whether they're going to proceed with this appeal. They clearly are going to. They're just trying to buy time to write the appellate brief. And, you know, I filed some pleadings. You can see them at freedomwatchusa.org and also LarryKlayman.com, stating that the appellate court should simply close the case down and dismiss the appeal.
Yeah.
But this is unbelievable that they would proceed, because the prosecutors in the Las Vegas attorney's office, Stephen Myray, who was the first assistant, he's now been demoted slightly to being a line attorney, Dan Sheese, an individual by the name of Ahmed, the previous U.S. Attorney Daniel Bogdan, they all not only just set the Bundys up and entrapped them, they sent out sharpshooters to their ranch. They participated in death threats against them if they wouldn't leave their land and give up their cattle. And they got caught lying by a very pro-Obama, pro-Harry Reid judge, Gloria Navarro. Now, even she had to dismiss the indictments. I mean, an ordinary judge would have dismissed it lickety-split, but this judge, it really had to be bad for her to do it. And she basically indicted Myray and the rest of the prosecutors in that office. Now, who's handling the appeal? A woman named Elizabeth White, who's part of that office, an assistant U.S. attorney, and it's basically just to cover the asses of these prosecutors because their career will otherwise be toast. They not only committed all kinds of ethical violations, lied to the judge, suborned perjury. They, in addition to that, committed crimes in their own right. And that's why this appeal is proceeding, because they're hoping in a Hail Mary that they're going to get a decision out of the Ninth Circuit that saves their careers. They'll never be indicted because, you know, the wagons will be circled at the Justice Department, but saves their careers. And that's what it's all about. Meanwhile, severe emotional distress is being, you know, continually meted out against the Bundy family and their supporters, the peaceful protesters that were indicted along with them. And we really need the support of the American people to wage this defense. So please go to KlaymanBundyDefenseFund.org, KlaymanBundyDefenseFund.org, contribute to that cause, because we have a big fight that still remains. And then, of course, as I mentioned last week, is our client Shafer Cox. If you want to talk about that, we can talk about Shafer.
Well, but wait, I got some questions to ask you first. Sorry, Larry. There's so much I want to ask you. And of course, there's some viewers who maybe aren't familiar with the legal terminology, so I just want to clarify. The Ninth Circuit is an appeal court, correct?
That's right.
And suborning perjury means what?
Suborning perjury? It means telling people to lie on the stand. We had FBI agents, we had Bureau of Land Management agents, we had others that went on the witness stand that knowingly lied. The prosecutors, I believe, were behind it. The prosecutors themselves lied to Judge Navarro, not under oath, but in making oral argument. There was a whistleblower that came forward by the name of Larry Wooten at the end of the trial that said that Stephen Myray and the others covered up kill lists that were on the Bundy's head, disparagements of their religion, their Mormon faith, and other things. And yet the U.S. Attorney's Office in Nevada continues with an appeal against the Bundys, which is going to be very, very costly, and which continues to mete out severe emotional distress to a family that's already been through a lot. The Bundys and their supporters were in prison for 2 years. Klayman was thrown in solitary confinement by this judge for no reason.
It's one of the most shameful cases in recent history, isn't it? It's really quite shocking.
It is. I mean, they were denied right of counsel. They were denied a speedy trial. The Las Vegas Review-Journal, which is a mainstream publication, called the judge the friend of the prosecutors and chided her for violating constitutional rights. Yet even this judge was forced to dismiss the indictment. But our Justice Department, our Department of Injustice, and I take this personally because I was a proud alumnus. You know, I was a lawyer for the Justice Department, a prosecutor and defense lawyer. You know, I am sickened and disgusted by the Justice Department, which has now become the enemy of the American people.
Now, Larry, the Bundy case is interesting because it was a really prime example of how something is spun by the media. I wasn't as dialed into the news and politics when that was first going on as I have become since starting Crowdsource the Truth. And of course, you and I met at the Bundy trial, and I've been learning a lot about it since then. A lot of people have told me that it was very similar to the Ruby Ridge incident, which I'm not terribly familiar with, but in my researching William Barr, I came across this article as well, where William Barr was defending FBI snipers in this Ruby Ridge matter, and he kind of lied about it. He said he had nothing to do with it, and then they found phone calls that he was involved in. Do we know anything about Barr's involvement with Ruby Ridge?
That's great research, Jason. I'm going to follow up on this. Thank God for you in this research. But this is typical of the Washington establishment. You know, I go into court every week with Justice Department lawyers, the federal programs branch, that are paid liars. That's what they are. Paid liars. You've seen them in action. Okay, you saw them, you know, when I was up against them with regard to getting Mueller's grand jury leaked documents. And they go in there shamelessly and lie for these other branches of government. And Barr, at a higher level, you know, ran interference apparently for the snipers that killed people at Ruby Ridge. Yeah. And take a look at Waco too. We need to look at that with Janet Reno. You know, but this is part and parcel to Washington. It's the American people, you know, come third. You know, first comes themselves, then comes their friends, and then comes the American people. Yeah. And that's what we're up against. And that's exactly why we fought a revolution. That's exactly why we have a Second Amendment. That's exactly why Jefferson said we were going to be in a revolution down the line at some point where the corruption and the government oppression becomes so great the people can't take it anymore. And, you know, as I said, and I always say this because I want to solve it legally and peacefully. I want to solve it in the courts. I want to solve it with citizens' grand juries. I want to solve it in the court of public opinion. Yeah. But we are on the verge of a violent revolution. And get ready, I believe it's coming.
Wow. Well, hopefully that can be avoided. And I definitely want to follow up with you on Shafer Cox. I'm very interested in that case. But before we shift gears to Shafer, I just wanted to ask you one more thing, because I know this is very relevant to a lot of the other cases that you're involved in right now. But this article on the ACLU website is talking about how William Barr helped build America's surveillance state, that he was writing the Patriot Act and doing all this stuff while he was working for H.W. Bush. I think everybody knows. It says right here, while serving in the George H.W. Bush administration, Barr helped develop what became a blueprint for the National Security Agency's mass phone surveillance program. In 1992, he and his then deputy, now this is wrong, I think it's his assistant, but it says then Deputy Robert Mueller authorized the Drug Enforcement Administration to begin amassing phone call data in bulk. So, I mean, these guys are in a regular practice of just flouting the Constitution, spying on Americans, lying to the public, doing all kinds of things that are well outside the bounds of anything remotely resembling the law. I think that simply calling them members of a club is really understating the nefarious. I think these guys are the biggest criminals we've ever seen. These are the leaders of the most sophisticated criminal syndicate, the last remaining swamp creatures of the swampiest, murkiest, muddiest, scaliest, most disgusting swamp creatures known, and we haven't even gotten to Lanny Davis yet.
You're right. It's a criminal enterprise, and you corrected me. It's a club. It's like a mafia club. It's mafioso. Right. It's a different kind of club. As Groucho Marx said, I wouldn't want to be a member that would have me as a member of the club. These people, are happy to be part of that club because they're better than the rest of us, quote unquote, and they get to tell us what to do. And I'm sorry, American people can't take it anymore. Right. We're at the end. We're at the end.
Yes, and so let's talk for a moment about Lanny Davis. Of course, he's a longtime adversary of yours. You've challenged him in court many, many times. He's now representing Michael Cohen, which is absolutely absurd. And we, yet again, get another totally basically fabricated story from BuzzFeed. They seem to have no problem publishing stories that are devoid of evidence. And earlier today, you were on Newsmax, I believe, talking about how some of these things are signature moves by Lanny Davis. What can you tell us about Lanny Davis and what's going on with Michael Cohen?
I understand who Lanny Davis is. Lanny Davis is the former Yale Law School classmate of Bill and Hillary Clinton. Lanny Davis worked for the law firm of Patton, Boggs and Blow. Patton, Boggs and Blow, particularly Hale Boggs, specialized in raising money for candidates, legal bribery, and then calling the chits in once they're elected. This is the game in Washington, D.C. A very sleazy law firm. Ron Brown was a partner in that law firm, the old-time money raiser for the Democratic National Committee, later the Secretary of Commerce during the Clinton administration.
Who died in a plane crash, just like Hale Boggs.
And we can do a whole show on that one. And Lanny Davis was out there during the Clinton years when I was running Judicial Watch, when we were fighting the Clintons. He was all on TV. He would pretend that he was, open-minded, someone that you could reason with. Sean Hannity would have him on. Fox would have him on. CNN, MSNBC, the whole rest of them. But Lanny Davis is the slimiest, sleaziest lawyer that I ever came in contact with in Washington, D.C. He just reeks of sleaze. Now, what he did here was he got a hold of Michael Cohen, who's probably even dumber than George W. Bush, okay? And in reality, he manipulated him into cooperating with Mueller. He didn't even get him a good plea agreement, didn't even get him a cooperation agreement. He sold him down the river because he wants to use Michael Cohen to bring down President Trump, in favor of his Democratic friends. He's a Clinton loyalist. He's a close friend of Hillary and Bill Clinton. And Michael Cohen is just the innocent, quote unquote, obviously he's not innocent, stooge who's gone along with this. And this whole thing with BuzzFeed is really interesting and terrible in that BuzzFeed, apparently, because even Special Counsel Robert Mueller repudiated it today, came up with this false report that Michael Cohen was prepared to testify before the special counsel, before the grand jury, and presumably also Congress next month, that President Trump asked him to lie about his connections with Russia concerning a Trump Tower they wanted to build in Moscow. They asked him to lie in front of Congress when he testified there. Well, why is it, if Lanny Davis is the lawyer of Michael Cohen, that he allowed this lie to hang out there for at least 2 days? Lanny Davis previously admitted to lying about something else that Michael Cohen had said with the president in terms of the meeting at the Trump Tower. And then you ask yourself a bigger question. Why is it that the District of Columbia Bar Disciplinary Council is entertaining complaints against Kellyanne Conway, the counselor to the president, for stuff she said on Fox News, just for her statements? Why is it that people over there are likely entertaining complaints against Justice Kavanaugh, and I'm no fan of Kavanaugh, and a lot of other conservatives, but at the same time, they're not taking any action to discipline Lanny Davis, David Kendall, who destroyed evidence, and others? What I'm talking about here, and this is part of the club too, is that it's not just people on Capitol Hill, it's It's not just people at the Justice Department. It's not just people, in the media. It's the entire Washington, D.C. establishment, which is so far left that if you are a supporter of President Trump, you must be destroyed. And that's why we're in a war with the left right now. And Lanny Davis, using Michael Cohen as his tool, is part of that. Yet he walks off unscathed from the District of Columbia bar for all the lies and suborning to perjury that he helped to commit. And that's what we're dealing with. And as a lawyer, I'm disgusted by the whole thing. And, that's why we're fighting back, Jason, because it is a criminal enterprise, and it comprises a lot of different moving parts in Washington, D.C.
Yeah. Well, and, Larry, there's also this email that Lanny Davis sent to Hillary Clinton in 2010. When did she become Secretary of State?
In 2008.
Right.
Yeah, it was the quid pro quo to try to keep her quiet.
Well,
so she wouldn't run against. She wouldn't run against Obama in 2012, and a lot of people said, with some facetiousness, but I think with some reality, that if she was second in line to Barack Obama, that his life expectancy might not be too great. So he didn't name her as vice presidential candidate.
Right. I mean, the thing I'm getting at is, Larry, of course, as a lawyer, he should know that his friend, or whatever it is that Hillary Clinton is, as Secretary of State, should not be emailing with him. He's another guy who's here in WikiLeaks with all these emails, and he's asking her for favors. I mean, as you're saying, Lanny Davis is implicated all over the place in all kinds of wrongdoing. The fact that Michael Cohen, I just don't believe that Michael Cohen would choose him. This is the second craziest choice of lawyers after Michael Flynn choosing Eric Holder's law firm. It doesn't seem like they could be choosing these. I feel like someone is forcing them to take these lawyers. Is that possible?
It is. People are recommending them, and they're selling them down the river, like I said. But, in Washington, D.C., because you have this club or criminal enterprise, because everybody's so cozy, because it's so close-knit, that people think that these lawyers will actually represent them. And they won't. And they're representing their own interest and the interests of their political benefactors.
Right.
And mistakes were made. And Michael Cohen's not the brightest guy in the world. He went to some law school, and law school doesn't make you smart. You're no smarter if you went to Yale than if you went to where I went, Emory Law School, which, is a good law school. But, he went to a law school nobody even heard of. I mean, he probably had to pay to get in there. I mean, it's
law school
the guy's
from
a
the
moron.
Back of a Cracker Jacks box.
Yeah, so it's easy to manipulate him, and he's been manipulated, and although he's not worthy of much sympathy, the guy has been sold down the river by Lanny Davis and the rest.
Do we know anything about this photo of him returning to his Manhattan apartment today after having been in the hospital? I mean, the Daily Mail is trying to spin it as something nefarious happened. On Drudge Report, this was reported as Michael Cohen returning to his home with a black eye, making it seem like he'd been beaten up, but his representatives say it was scheduled shoulder surgery.
Well, who knows? Maybe he owes the mafia money. He probably borrowed from them, too. Maybe they paid him back. I don't know.
Nobody really knows. So before we get to Shafer Cox, which is a really important story that doesn't get enough coverage, I just wanted to go over this one last thing about Barr again. This is an article from Veterans Today that still needs a lot of checking to be done. The part about this that I'm interested in is where it quotes a conversation between Ted Gunderson and Chip Tatum. Chip Tatum has come out and admitted details about being a pilot during IranContra, working with Barry Seal, knowing a lot of stuff about this. And, he's basically saying that William Barr was directly involved in covering all this stuff from IranContra. Chip Tatum has also admitted to Ole Damagard that Chip Tatum was involved in the assassination of Olof Palme, the Swedish prime minister, and that Mr. Barr was an attorney who was helping make these problems go away.
Very, very possible. For money in Washington, D.C., anything's possible. For money and power, that's the name of the game. There's no morality there. There's no ethics. There's no integrity. Almost none. When I go to Washington, Jason, I look around. It's like a dark cloud is hanging over the city. I go because I have to, because I have business there. because I'm in front of courts and judges and whatever. But frankly, the place makes me sick. And it's really sad because it's a beautiful city. And it's supposed to be a shining city on a hill, as Ronald Reagan used to call it. But instead, it's become the depths of hell. And that's what we're dealing with today.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, it's important for people to support freedomwatchusa.org. You and your team there, Larry, continue to amaze me, just the amount of cases that you're involved in. And it's not like you're just, taking cases to boost the volume. You only select cases that deal with violations of people's rights and really things that shouldn't happen in the United States of America. And that brings us to what's probably going to be our last subject for tonight. Shafer Cox, have you spoken with him? Have there been any developments in his horrible...
I spoke with him today, and I'd like to do a whole show on this someday, and I'll be brief because we only have about 15 minutes left, or 10 minutes. But this is a young guy. He's extremely bright. He's extremely charismatic. As I said last time, his mother was Jewish. His dad was a Baptist minister. They were very successful in Colorado. They moved to Alaska so the dad could have his ministry. He's been homeschooled. He knows about philosophy. He reminds you of a Thomas Jefferson type in our founding fathers. I mean, I sat there in prison with him for 7 hours a few weeks ago, and I was just amazed. He was an activist. He ran for the state legislature in Alaska. And Alaska is wild. You talk about the Wild West, I mean, that's child's play compared to Alaska. And he got involved in gun rights movements. He got involved in other movements. He's somebody who, like you and I, are skeptical of authority being meted out by people that aren't as smart as the rest of us, but think they're smarter and think they're better.
Right. And
he came upon a pedophile human trafficking ring with little Eskimo boys, okay, and there's rampant homosexuality in Alaska. Okay? I guess,
really?
The buffaloes or whatever, or I don't mean to make a joke about it. It's not something to joke about, so I apologize. But there is. I mean, it's so crazy, and both federal and state officials were involved in this, trafficking young boys. And he uncovered it, and they destroyed him. They set him up, both state and federal officials. They thought he had to be crushed. An informant by the name of Bill Fulton, who not incidentally, according to Shafer, came on to him, and Shafer rejected his advances. He hated Shafer because of that. Shafer's very good looking. He's very charismatic, as I said. Set him up with the FBI. There were 10 other FBI informants that got into this whole thing. And they had to destroy Shafer because he had also started a militia, and he was peaceful. He didn't want to hurt anybody. And a militia is legal under the Second Amendment, as I wrote about today in WorldNet Daily. And he became a so-called threat to federal power and to state power. So they had him indicted through corrupt prosecutors, much like the corrupt prosecutors in Las Vegas. One of these prosecutors was also criticized by Judge Emmett Sullivan in the Ted Stevens prosecution when Judge Sullivan threw that out for prosecutorial abuse. And he was convicted of attempted murder and conspiracy to murder and some weapons charges. They set him up with the weapons. These weapons would have otherwise been illegal if they had been registered, but they were sold to an intermediary. Shafer really was not involved in that either. And he was sentenced to 33 years in prison. He's done 7 so far.
33.
33. And he's in a prison in Terre Haute, Indiana, which is the only prison in the United States that executes people. And in that prison, believe it or not, are tens of radical jihadi terrorists that are in the same cell with him. And these terrorists have recently, one of them in particular, murdered a Christian. They slit the throat of a Jewish inmate. It's something that I have asked the Bureau of Prisons to look into. It's a terrible situation, and his life is in danger every single day. Recently, he was thrown in solitary confinement. Thank God he's out now.
What's the name of that prison, Larry?
It's the Federal Detention Institution at Terre Haute, Indiana. And, the warden is a decent human being. There are good people there, but it's out of control. And these people are being treated in a terrible way, inadequate food and inadequate water. And I hope that the Bureau of Prisons will be looking into it. But Shafer, and we will get him out. Already one count has been dismissed by the Ninth Circuit on appeal, the attempted murder. They left in a conspiracy charge. He's up for resentencing, because when you throw out one charge, the entire sentence goes out in May. I'm preparing a pardon and/or clemency petition for him right now. We're going to go to President Trump. But Shafer's the kind of person that we need in this country. He's not afraid, and he'll stand up. And he has the ability to unite people of faith, to do it peacefully and legally. And, you know, when they came after him and his kids and his family, he made a few remarks, and they used that to frame him. But everybody can say things from time to time, but he never sought to harm a hair on the head of anyone. And you can understand the frustration that Shafer felt, because many people in this country are feeling that frustration today, and they're not in the bullseye of the federal government or the state government. They just feel it generally. And that's why we at Freedom Watch are trying to relieve that pressure through peaceful legal proceedings, because we don't want to see violence out there. But the American people are agitated right now, and people are at the barricades, and they're about ready to react. Particularly when they see these dishonest, disgusting politicians in Washington, D.C., the Chuck Schumers, the Nancy Pelosi's, the Gerald Nadlers, the Adam Schiffs, and Maxine Waters, who know no bounds in terms of truthfulness and honesty, who won't even allow a wall to be built on the Mexican border because they want to destroy our duly elected president. We are at a flashpoint right now.
Yeah. Just back on Shafer for a moment, Larry, when you say that he said something that he might not have meant, this is really part of the FBI provocateur's goal, right? He wants to agitate and really do things to upset the target so that they say or do something that can then be, oh, you've threatened a federal officer, you've threatened a witness in a federal case. I see these tactics being exercised by people like David Swigert, trying to say this or that person is a federally protected witness in an ongoing federal civil litigation. You said X, which is witness tampering or threatening a witness or whatever it might be. These are standard lawfare tactics that these guys are using all the time.
They provoke you, okay? They poke you until somebody says something, then they use that against you, notwithstanding First Amendment rights. You know, Shafer didn't do this, but if somebody threatens me or you, Jason, you go to the police will tell you, the FBI will tell you, we can't do anything about it until there's an overt act in furtherance of a crime. Yeah. You know, words are not enough. Look at Farrakhan, who's out there. He threatens whites and Jews and Christians all the time. Nothing ever happened to him, although some of his disciples actually killed people, like in Dallas, the Dallas massacre, you know, a couple years ago. But yet, if someone like Shafer does it, okay, a white guy who does it, a white guy who is a threat, who doesn't have the protection of being a minority in today's world, and I believe in equal rights for everybody, so I'm not suggesting that whites deserve more rights than any other minority, but they'll throw the book at him because he's vulnerable. And that's the reality. That's the reality of the world we live in.
Larry, provocateurs came here to this apartment building, showed my home address on a video live stream. The same provocateur just days later instructed people to attack Jason Goodman. I told the NYPD and the New York FBI office, and they've done nothing. So,
well, let me give you another example, Jason. Okay, off the point, we only have about a minute. Steve King, Congressman Steve King, who had his committeeships taken away by the Republican leadership. Steve King is not a racist. I've known him for a long time. Maybe he said something in an artful way, and maybe he's reacting like a lot of people in this country are reacting. But the Republican Party destroyed this patriot, and the leftist media is happy to do it too, and that is the world we live in today. And in a more extreme example, you have a Shafer Cox who's doing 33 years. Because he was inartful in the way he expressed himself and was set up by the federal government because he uncovered a pedophilia, human trafficking, Eskimo child scheme in Alaska. And they were making a lot of money on this, these federal and state officials, corruptly.
Right. They were obviously desperate to cover that.
Go to freeshafercox.com, freeshafercox.com, read about it, donate to his legal defense fund. Shafer Cox is a hero, and one day he will be out of prison, I hope soon. And, we need to protect him when he is out because he's a significant force to be reckoned with. That's how articulate and well-educated and equilibrated he is. He's a true American patriot.
Right. So it's very important that people support these different cases that Larry is involved in. Of course, you can give your general support to freedomwatchusa.org by going onto the website there. You can read the blog posts and review cases that they're involved in. You can sign the petition to remove Robert Mueller and now William Barr. I find this to be so important. I really hope that people watching will go and sign the petition. And Freedom Watch, of course, does need our financial support. These cases don't prosecute themselves, so I hope that people will donate on freedomwatch.org. Larry, of course, defending Dr. Jerome Corsi and now his stepson, who has come into Mueller's crosshairs. People can go to CorsiNation.com to help the doctor and his legal defense. Of course, the Klayman Bundy Legal Defense Fund. These are all cases that Larry and his attorneys and the team there at freedomwatchusa.org are helping. Larry, I don't know, FreeShaferCox.com. Is it the same? Is this the right website here?
Frankly, my eyes aren't that good, Jason, but you'll find a lot on the internet. And don't believe what you read from the other side, but FreeShaferCox.com.
Yeah, FreeShaferCox.com seems to, we'll have to look into that and we'll have
maybe
the
it's
correct.
org, maybe it's ORG. Try that one.
Okay, sure, let's try that. I want to make sure that people can help Shafer. I haven't met the guy and I don't know that much about him, but the stories you've shared with us about the treatment he's received is so horrendous. I think we all, forget about Shafer Cox. Think about yourself. You would not want this happening to you, to your brother, your sister, your father, your cousin, your friend. The fact that this type of thing can go on, even if you dislike Shafer Cox or Klayman Bundy or Dr. Jerome Corsi, this is a fight for justice, and the work that's being done at freedomwatchusa.org is critical. So I hope that our viewers will go there and support Larry and his team. Larry, it's always a pleasure to have you on. I'm going to keep digging into this William Barr guy. I think he's one of the most dangerous people we've seen so far on the political stage since Donald Trump has become president.
He's a nothing. He's a tool, Jason, and keep it up. And thank you for giving me that information because we're going to follow up on it too.
Thank you, Larry. Have a great night. Have a great weekend. And thanks everybody for watching. I'm going to have a blockbuster report tomorrow with a new guest who's going to give us information about the dark overlord, a shadowy hacker or group of hackers who have been releasing information about legal cases related to 9/11. So people will hopefully tune in for that. I'll see everybody tomorrow, and thanks for watching.